The crystal chandelier caught her tears before they could fall, reflecting her desperation in 1,000 fractured pieces. Zara Williams moved through Marcus Sterling's penthouse suite like a ghost haunting paradise. The marble floors gleamed beneath her worn sneakers, each step echoing softly in the cabinet space that cost more than she'd earned in 10 lifetimes. Golden handles on mahogany wardrobes, imported roses perfuming the air, silk curtains worth her monthly salary, all of it beautiful, all of it untouchable. She needed this job. Her daughter Amara's medical bills wouldn't pay themselves, and the eviction notice crumpled in her uniform pocket served as a constant reminder of what was at stake. So when the fat brown rat scurried across the Persian rug near Marcus's bed, Zara's scream caught in her throat. Her heart hammered against her ribs as the creature disappeared under the four-poster bed, its tail leaving a trail through the dust she'd somehow missed. Without thinking, without breathing, she bolted. The nearest door, any door, became her sanctuary. She yanked the handle and rushed inside, slamming it behind her with enough force to rattle the frame. Steam hit her face like a warm embrace. Sandalwood soaked thick in the air, and that's when she realized her mistake. Marcus Sterling stood frozen in his marble bathroom, water droplets cascading down his sculpted chest like liquid diamonds, a white towel hanging dangerously low on his hips. Their eyes met through the steam, and time stopped. In that moment, between breath and heartbeat, a maid and a billionaire discovered that destiny cares nothing for social boundaries. Terror overrode reason. Zara launched herself forward, clinging to Marcus like he was her lifeline, her body pressed against his warm, damp skin, his muscled arms instinctively wrapped around her waist, steadying them both as her momentum threatened to send them tumbling onto the heated marble floor. The scent of his cologne mixed with steam created an intoxicating cloud around them. "Jesus Christ," Marcus breathed, his deep voice rumbling through his chest and into her trembling frame. His heart thundered beneath her cheek, matching the frantic rhythm of her own. Water from his dark hair dripped on her neck, each drop like electricity against her fevered skin. "Zara? What the She pulled back just enough to look into his face, and the world tilted on its axis. Up close, Marcus Sterling was a devastatingly beautiful, sharp jawline carved by angels, eyes the color of midnight storms, skin that seemed to glow in the bathroom's golden light. Every magazine photo, every society page image had failed to capture the raw magnetism radiating from him. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Sterling," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the sound of her own thundering pulse. "There was a rat, and I didn't know you were—" She dissolved as she became hyper-aware of their position, of his bare chest beneath her palms, of how perfectly she fit in his arms. Marcus's expression shifted from shock to something far more dangerous. A slow smile curved his lips as his grip on her waist tightened almost imperceptibly. "A rat scared you this much?" His voice held amusement, but his eyes burned with something entirely different, something that made her knees weak and her breath catch in her throat. Shame has a taste, and it's bitter copper mixed with the lingering sweetness of a moment that should never have happened. Zara stumbled backward, her hands flying to cover her face as mortification crashed over her in waves. The bathroom door slammed behind her as she fled, her sneakers squeaking against the marble hallway in her desperate escape. Her uniform stuck to her skin where his body heat had transferred, creating phantom touches that followed her down the corridor like whispered secrets. She ducked into the nearest supply closet, pressing her back against the wall as she fought to steady her breathing. Her reflection in the small mirror showed flushed cheeks, wild eyes, and lips that looked fuller somehow, as if the brief contact with his chest had awakened something sleeping within her. "Get it together," she whispered harshly to her reflection. "You're the help. He's Marcus Sterling. This is not a fairy tale." But even as she repeated the mantra, her treacherous mind replayed every second of their encounter. The strength in his arms, the way he looked at her not with disgust or anger, but with curiosity, the warmth of his skin, the steady rhythm of his heartbeat, the way his voice had dropped to that dangerous register when he'd spoken her name. Back in his bathroom, Marcus stood motionless, staring at the door she'd fled through. He'd known Zara Williams for 6 months, the quiet maid who moved through his world like smoke, barely visible, always efficient. But the woman who just clung to him, trembling and desperate and vibrantly alive, that was someone entirely different. He ran a hand through his damp hair, trying to shake off the lingering sensation of her body against him. In his world of calculated moves and strategic relationships, genuine reactions were rare as diamonds. But there had been nothing calculated about Zara's fear, nothing strategic about the way she'd sought comfort in his arms, and absolutely nothing he could do to forget how right it had felt. The hunter doesn't realize he's become the hunted until he finds himself tracking his prey through every room of his own house. Marcus's morning routine shattered into pieces. Instead of reviewing quarterly reports over breakfast, he found himself watching Zara dust the dining room's crystal cabinet, her movements graceful despite the obvious tension in her shoulders. She wore the same black uniform as always, her natural hair pulled back in a neat bun, but something had shifted in his perception. Where once he'd seen invisible efficiency, now he noticed the elegant curve of her neck, the way she bit her lip when concentrating. Zara. Her name felt different on his tongue now, heavier with possibility. Zara froze mid-motion, the feather duster trembling in her grip. "Sit with me." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Zara's dark eyes widened, darting between his face and the mahogany table set for one. "I can't, Mr. Sterling. It wouldn't be appropriate." Her voice carried that same breathless quality from the bathroom, and Marcus felt something primitive stir in his chest. "I make the rules in this house," he said quietly, his business voice tempered with something softer. "And I'm asking you to sit." He gestured to the chair across from him, close enough to smell her subtle perfume, something warm and vanilla sweet that he'd never noticed before but would never forget. Zara shook her head, clutching the duster like a lifeline. "Thank you, sir, but I have work to finish." The formality was a wall between them, brick by brick, and Marcus felt an unexpected urge to tear it down with his bare hands. He leaned back in his chair, studying her with the same intensity he reserved for hostile takeovers. Most people never said no to him. His wealth, his power, his reputation, they all bent the world to his will. But this woman, this beautiful, stubborn woman, stood her ground with quiet dignity. "You're different, Zara," he murmured, more to himself than to her. Her breath hitched audibly, and for a moment her professional mask slipped. He saw fear there, yes, but also something else, something that looked suspiciously like longing. Blood has a way of cutting through pretense, revealing truths that polite conversation never could. The antique vase exploded against the gallery's marble floor, crystal shards scattering like fallen stars. Zara gasped when pain sliced through her palm, crimson drops spattering the pristine white tiles. The cut was deeper than expected, a thin line of fire across her lifeline that seemed to pulse with each heartbeat. Before she could reach for a cloth, warm fingers wrapped around her wrist. Marcus appeared beside her as if materialized from shadow, his grip gentle but unyielding as he examined her injury. "Careless," he murmured, but there was no reproach in his voice, only concern that made her chest tighten. He produced a silk handkerchief from his jacket pocket, the fabric embroidered with his initials in gold thread. As he wrapped it around her palm with surprising tenderness, Zara's breath caught. His head was bent close enough that she could see the individual strands of his dark hair, smell his cologne mixed with something uniquely him. "You work too hard," he said quietly, his thumb stroking over the makeshift bandage. "This mansion doesn't deserve your blood." The intimacy of the moment, his hands cradling hers, his voice soft with unexpected emotion, sent shock waves through her nervous system. When he looked up, their faces were inches apart, close enough to share the same air. His eyes, those midnight storms, searched her face with an intensity that made her feel exposed, vulnerable, seen in ways that terrified her. "Mr. Sterling," she began, but he silenced her with a slight shake of his head. "Marcus," he corrected, his voice barely above a whisper. "When we're alone like this, call me Marcus." The request was simple, but it carried the weight of revolution. In those 4 syllables lay the destruction of every barrier between them, every rule that kept their worlds separate. Zara's heart hammered against her ribs as she realized she was drowning in his proximity, in the way he looked at her like she was precious, breakable, worth protecting. When she finally found her voice, it came out as the barest breath. "Thank you, Marcus." His smile was dangerous, beautiful, and absolutely devastating. Fear of the dark pales in comparison to fear of the light someone else might shine on your hidden desires. The storm arrived like an angry god, lightning splitting the Atlanta sky when thunder shook the mansion's foundation. When the lights flickered and died, plunging Sterling Manor into velvet darkness, Zara's childhood terrors rose from their graves. She sat frozen on her narrow bed, heart hammering as shadows seemed to writhe and breathe around her. The small flashlight from her nightstand cast a weak circle of light that only emphasized how vast the darkness truly was. Her hands shook as she wrapped a robe around her pajamas and stepped into the corridor, desperate for the kitchen's familiar safety. But the hallway stretched endlessly, filled with shapes that her terrified mind transformed into monsters. "Zara?" His voice emerged from the blackness like salvation. Marcus materialized in the flashlight beam, wearing only black silk pajama pants and a partially unbuttoned shirt that revealed tantalizing glimpses of his chest. His hair was tousled, his eyes alert despite the late hour. "What are you doing wandering around?" "The storm," she whispered, her voice thin with fear. "The lights went out, and I've always been afraid of—" She stopped, embarrassed by her childish phobia, but Marcus stepped closer, his presence solid and reassuring in the uncertain darkness. "Afraid of the dark," he finished gently, understanding flickering in his eyes. His hand rose as if to touch her face, then stopped millimeters from her cheek, hovering in the space between comfort and propriety. "You're trembling." The beam of her flashlight caught the concern etched across his features, the way his jaw clenched as if fighting some internal battle. When another crash of thunder made her flinch, his resolve crumbled. His fingers finally made contact, sliding along her jawline with devastating tenderness. "You know what's more dangerous than darkness?" Marcus asked, his voice rough with something that made her knees weak. "Being alone with me when you look at me like that." His thumb traced her lower lip, and Zara felt her world tilt dangerously off its axis. "Go back to your room, Zara, before I forget every reason why I should keep my distance." But as another lightning flash illuminated his face, she saw her own desire reflected in his eyes, and running seemed impossible. The most exquisite torture is sitting across a dinner table from someone you're falling in love with, pretending they're a stranger. The crystal chandelier cast dancing shadows across the dining room as Marcus's business associates filled the space with expensive cologne and louder laughter. Zara moved between them like a ghost, pouring wine with steady hands, while her heart performed acrobatics every time she neared Marcus's chair. He commanded the table's attention effortlessly, discussing mergers and acquisitions in that deep voice that made her pulse quicken. When she leaned over to refill his glass, their fingers brushed, a contact so brief it might have been accidental, but the electricity that shot through her arm, the way Marcus's conversation faltered for just a heartbeat, told a different story. His hand lingered against hers for 2 seconds longer than propriety allowed, his thumb grazing her knuckles in a caress disguised as coincidence. "Thank you, Zara," he said quietly, her name rolling off his tongue like a secret shared in the darkness. The other men barely glanced up from their plates, but she felt the weight of Marcus's gaze following her retreat to the kitchen like a physical touch. When she returned with the next course, she caught him watching her with an intensity that made her stumble. His eyes held promises and warnings in equal measure, tracking her movements with the focused attention of a predator studying prey. Every time she passed behind his chair, she felt the heat radiating from his body, caught subtle hints of his cologne that made her breath catch. The businessman to his left was discussing quarterly projections, but Marcus's responses came automatically, his real attention focused on the woman serving his dinner. When Zara bent to collect his empty plate, he shifted slightly, his shoulder brushing against her arm, another accident that sent shockwaves through her nervous system. "Careful," he murmured, so low that only she could hear it, but the word carried layers of meaning that had nothing to do with the dishes in her hands and everything to do with the dangerous game they'd begun playing. As their guests continued their oblivious chatter, Marcus Sterling and his maid communicated in a language of stolen touches and smoldering glances that threatened to burn them both alive. The most dangerous conversations happen when the last guest leaves and pretense finally drops its mask. The grandfather clock chimed midnight as Zara stacked the final dinner plate, her movements mechanical while her mind replayed every loaded glance, every accidental touch from the evening. The dining room felt different now, intimate despite its grand proportions, heavy with unspoken words that hung in the air like incense. "You avoided me all evening." Marcus's voice cut through the silence, making her freeze with a crystal goblet halfway to the serving tray. He stood in the doorway, his tie loosened, shirt unbuttoned at the collar, looking more human than billionaire in the candlelight's glow. "I was working," Zara replied, her voice steadier than her hands. She could feel him approaching without turning around, his presence like gravity pulling her into his orbit. "Just doing my job, Mr. Sterling." "Marcus," he corrected, and she could hear the smile in his voice, "and we both know it was more than that." He stopped directly behind her, close enough that his breath stirred the fine hairs at her nape. "You felt it too, didn't you? Every time our eyes met, every time I said your name." Zara gripped tightened on the goblet as her resolve wavered.
"I don't know what you mean," she whispered, but the lie tasted bitter on her tongue. "Don't you?" His hand appeared beside hers on the table, not touching, but close enough to share warmth. "Because I've been watching you, Zara. The way you catch your breath when I enter a room, the way you blush when I look at you too long, the way you ran from me after the bathroom incident, like you were afraid of something bigger than embarrassment." She turned then, a mistake that left them inches apart, her back pressed against the table's edge. Marcus's eyes blazed with want and frustration, his jaw clenched with the effort of restraint. "You want to know what I'm afraid of?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm afraid that you make me forget who I am. I'm afraid that when you look at me like that, I start believing in fairy tales. And I'm afraid," Marcus said, his hand rising to cup her cheek, "that I'm already falling for someone I should keep at arm's length. Because I can't stop myself, Zara. God help me, I can't stop." Some conversations can only happen under starlight, where shadows hide the truth too dangerous for daylight. Sleep had become a foreign concept. Zara tossed restlessly in her narrow bed, Marcus's words echoing in her mind like a prayer and a curse. "I can't stop myself." The confession had shattered something inside her chest, leaving sharp fragments that cut with every breath. Finally, she gave up the pretense of sleep and slipped into the mansion's garden courtyard. Moonlight turned the fountain into liquid silver, its gentle trickling the only sound in the pre-dawn stillness. Zara pulled her cardigan tighter as she settled on the stone bench, trying to make sense of the impossible situation she had found herself in. A billionaire didn't fall for his maid. That was fiction, fantasy, the stuff of romance novels she read in stolen moments. "Couldn't sleep either." Marcus's voice emerged from the shadows like silk wrapping around her senses. He approached slowly, hands in his pockets, looking younger somehow in faded jeans and a simple white t-shirt. The casual clothes humanized him, stripped away layers of corporate armor to reveal the man underneath. "Mr. Sterling, Marcus," she corrected when his eyebrow arched. "I was just getting some air." Her pulse quickened as he sat beside her on the bench, close enough that their thighs almost touched. The night seemed to hold its breath around them. "You're running again," he observed, his voice gentle but knowing. "Every time we get close to something real, you disappear. Why?" His hand moved across the space between them, fingers finding hers in the darkness. The simple contact sent electricity racing up her arm. "This is insane," Zara whispered, even as her fingers intertwined with his. "Stop." The command was soft but absolute. Marcus turned to face her fully, his free hand cupping her cheek. "You're not nobody, Zara. You're the woman who makes me question everything I thought I wanted. You're intelligent, beautiful, strong enough to face life's cruelties and still maintain grace. You're..." He paused, swallowing hard. "You're everything I didn't know I was missing." The moonlight caught the tears gathering in her eyes as the impossibility of their situation crashed over her. "But that doesn't change reality," she said, her voice breaking. "The world will never accept us." "Then maybe," Marcus said, his thumb tracing her cheekbone, "it's time to stop caring what the world thinks." The staircase at midnight becomes a stage where two souls perform the most dangerous dance of all, falling in love. The grand staircase stretched above Zara like a marble mountain, its steps gleaming in the moonlight that poured through the tall windows. She'd given up on sleep entirely, her small room feeling more like a prison cell with each passing hour. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Marcus's face in the garden, heard his voice declaring war against the world for her sake. Her bare feet made no sound on the cold steps as she climbed, seeking the solace of the mansion's upper balcony where she could see the Atlanta skyline twinkling like fallen stars. But halfway up, a familiar silhouette stopped her heart. Marcus stood at the landing, leaning against the ornate railing, wearing nothing but dark silk pajama pants that hung low on his hips. "Great minds," he said softly, his voice carrying easily in the cathedral-like space. The moonlight carved shadows across his chest, highlighting every ridge of muscle, every line that spoke of controlled power. His hair was disheveled, as if he'd been running his hands through it, and his eyes held the same restless energy that had driven her from her bed. "I couldn't sleep," Zara admitted, clutching the railing as her knees threatened to buckle. "Every time I close my eyes, I hear you saying that I'm falling for you," Marcus finished, pushing away from the railing to descend the steps between them. Each footfall echoed like a heartbeat, matching the frantic rhythm in her chest. He stopped 2 steps above her, bringing them to eye level, close enough that she could see the vulnerability he tried to hide beneath his corporate mask. "Tell me to walk away," he challenged, his voice rough with want. "Tell me to fire you, send you somewhere safe from whatever this is between us." Her breath came in shallow pants as she studied his face, the sharp cheekbones, the full lips, the eyes that held storm clouds and lightning. "I can't," she whispered, the admission ripping from her throat like a confession torn from her soul. "God help me, Marcus. I can't tell you to leave because I'm falling too." His sharp intake of breath was the only warning before his hands framed her face, thumbs tracing her cheekbones with devastating gentleness. "Then we fall together," he murmured against her forehead, his lips barely brushing her skin. "Whatever comes next, we face it together." The heart's hungriest moments happen in the kitchen at 3 a.m., where honesty is the only thing on the menu. Steam rose from the forgotten tea kettle as Zara stood frozen in the mansion's industrial kitchen, her hands braced against the granite counter while her world tilted dangerously off its axis. Marcus filled the doorway like a force of nature, presence transforming the familiar space into something electric and dangerous. "Do you know what you've done to me?" he asked, stepping inside and letting the door swing shut behind him. The soft click of the latch sounded like a gunshot in the silence. "Do you know what you've done to me? I've had 3 hours of sleep in the past week. I can't concentrate in meetings because I'm wondering what you're doing, where you are, if you're thinking about me." Zara turned slowly, her back pressed against the counter as he approached with predatory grace. He'd thrown on a white dress shirt over his pajama pants, the fabric hanging open to reveal the chest that had haunted her dreams. "Marcus, please." "Please what?" He stopped just out of arm's reach, his dark eyes boring into hers with laser intensity. "Please keep pretending this isn't happening? Please keep running every time we get close to the truth?" His voice dropped to a whisper that somehow felt more powerful than a shout. "Or please finally admit that you feel this too." The question hung between them like a loaded gun, waiting for someone brave enough to pull the trigger. Zara's heart hammered against her ribs as she studied his face, seeing past the billionaire mask to the man underneath, vulnerable, desperate, completely undone by whatever was growing between them. "You want the truth?" Zara asked, her voice shaking with the magnitude of what she was about to confess. "The truth is that you scare me, Marcus Sterling. Not because you're rich or powerful, but because when you look at me, I feel like I matter. When you say my name, I feel beautiful. When you're near me, I forget every reason why this is impossible." Marcus's breath caught audibly, his composure cracking like ice in spring. "Zara?" "I'm not finished," she continued, tears burning behind her eyes. "The truth is that I'm a single mother with medical bills and a daughter who needs stability. I can't afford to fall for you, but I already have. I can't afford to want something I can never have, but I do. I want you so much, it physically hurts, and that terrifies me more than anything I've ever faced." The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by their ragged breathing and the distant hum of the refrigerator. Then Marcus moved, closing the distance between them in 2 swift strides, his hands framing her face as his forehead pressed against hers. "Then we be terrified together," he whispered against her lips. Power dynamics shift like tectonic plates when a billionaire realizes his employee holds his heart hostage. The morning sun streamed through Marcus's studio windows, casting golden squares on the Persian rug where Zara stood like a defendant before a judge. Her fingers twisted the cleaning cloth as she waited for him to speak. The silence stretched tight like a wire between them. "We need to talk," Marcus said, finally, his voice carrying the same authority that commanded boardrooms and bent competitors to his will. But there was something else beneath the surface, something raw and uncertain that made Zara's pulse quicken. "If this is about last night," she began, but he silenced her with a raised hand. "This is about every night since you burst into my bathroom scared of a rat. This is about the way you've turned my ordered world into chaos without even trying." He stopped directly in front of her, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. "Do you want to know what scares me?" he asked, his voice dropping to that dangerous register that made her knees weak. "It's the fact that a woman I employ has the power to destroy my concentration with a single glance." Zara's breath caught as he leaned closer, his hands braced on either side of her against the bookshelf, caging her in without touching. "Do you think it's easy for me?" he demanded, his control fraying at the edges. "Watching you move through my house, knowing I can't touch you, can't kiss you, can't pull you into my arms and tell you exactly what you do to me? Then why don't you?" The words escaped before she could stop them, born from weeks of suppressed longing and desperate confusion. "Why don't you just fire me if I'm such a distraction?" Fabric. We're from different worlds, Marcus. The media, your business associates, the board, they'll destroy us both. "Let 'em try," Marcus replied, his free arm sliding around her waist to pull her closer. "I've been fighting battles my entire life, Zara. Hostile takeovers, corporate espionage, family politics. I won them all. But this is the first fight that actually matters." His forehead pressed against hers, their breath mingling in the small space between them. "Tell me you'll fight with me. Tell me this isn't one-sided madness." Zara's eyes fluttered closed as she felt herself falling, really falling past the point where she could pretend this was just attraction or loneliness. "It's not one-sided," she admitted, the words barely audible. "God help us both. It's not one-sided at all." The cruelest words are often spoken by people who've never risked their hearts for anything more dangerous than tax write-offs. The charity gala at the Ritz-Carlton buzzed with Atlanta's elite, champagne glasses catching crystal chandelier light as conversations flowed in carefully modulated tones. Zara had volunteered to work the event, hoping the familiar routine would help her forget the impossible conversation in Marcus's study 3 days ago. "Isn't that sweet?" The comment drifted from a cluster of society wives, their voices carrying the particular venom that came wrapped in silk scarves and pearl necklaces. Marcus Sterling actually hired one of them as house staff. How wonderfully progressive. Zara's steps faltered, her serving tray trembling slightly as the words hit like physical blows. She tried to move away, but the conversation followed her with predatory precision. "I heard she's quite attractive," another voice chimed in, dripping with false sympathy. "Poor thing, probably doesn't realize she's just entertainment. Men like Marcus don't marry the help, they just play with them until they get bored." The crystal goblins on Zara's tray clinked together as her hands shook with suppressed rage and humiliation. Every fear she'd harbored, every rational argument against whatever was growing between her and Marcus crystallized in those casually cruel words. She was entertainment, a playtime, a temporary distraction for a man who could buy and discard women like expensive toys. Zara. Marcus's voice cut through the crowd's chatter like a blade. She turned to find him standing directly behind her, his face carved from stone, his dark eyes blazing with fury that made the temperature around them drop 10 degrees. He'd heard everything. The society-wise fell silent, their faces cycling through embarrassment, fear, and calculating interest as they realized they'd been caught dissecting the personal life of one of Atlanta's most powerful men. But Marcus only had eyes for Zara, whose professional mask was cracking to reveal raw hurt underneath. "They're right," she whispered, her voice breaking. "This is exactly what everyone will think, what they'll always think." "They're wrong," Marcus said fiercely, stepping closer despite the curious glances from other guests. "And I'm going to prove it."
Love reveals itself not in grand gestures, but in the moment someone chooses to stand with you when the whole world suggests they run. The storm that night seemed to echo the tempest in Zara's heart as she stood before the fireplace in Sterling Manor's grand living room, its flames casting dancing shadows across the walls like restless spirits. She'd left the gala early, unable to endure more pitying glances and whispered speculation, her uniform exchanged for simple jeans and a sweater that made her look younger, more vulnerable. "I've been looking for you." Marcus's voice came from the doorway, soft but determined. He'd shed his tuxedo for dark jeans and a white button-down, the sleeves rolled up to reveal strong forearms that had held her, comforted her, made her believe in impossible things. "I needed to think," Zara replied without turning around, her eyes fixed on the hypnotic dance of flames. "Those women tonight, they weren't wrong, Marcus. This is exactly what people will say about us, about me." Her voice cracked on the last word, months of suppressed insecurity spilling out like water from a broken dam. "Turn around and look at me." The command was gentle but absolute, and Zara found herself obeying despite her better judgment. Marcus stood in the firelight, his expression intense, vulnerable, completely stripped of corporate armor. "Do you remember what I told you in my study about you winning?" She nodded mutely, her throat too tight for words. "I lied," Marcus said, taking a step closer. "You didn't win my heart, Zara. I gave it to you freely, completely, the moment you looked up at me in that bathroom with terror and trust in equal measure." He closed the distance between them, his hands finding hers in the firelight. "And I'll be damned if I let a bunch of bitter socialites convince you that what we have isn't real." Zara's eyes filled with tears that reflected the flames like liquid gold. "But Marcus, the difference in our worlds—" "Fuck our worlds," he said fiercely, his usual corporate composure completely abandoned. "I don't want their world, Zara. I want a world with you in it. I want morning coffee and shared laughter and someone who sees past the money to the man underneath." His thumbs brushed away her tears as they fell. "I want to build something real with you. Consequences be damned." The fire crackled in the silence that followed, the only sound their breathing and the storm raging outside. Then Zara stepped forward, closing the last inch between them, her hands fisting in his shirt as she pulled him down to her level. "Then let's build it," she whispered against his lips. "Let's build something they can't tear down." When their mouths finally met, it wasn't desperate or frantic. It was a promise sealed with fire and witnessed by storm. Two souls choosing each other, despite every rational argument against it. The world outside could whisper and judge and disapprove. In that moment,
They had each other, and that was revolution enough. The bravest thing anyone can do is choose love when the whole world is betting on fear. The morning after the fireplace confession dawned gray and uncertain, matching the anxiety that twisted in Zara's stomach as she prepared for what felt like the most important day of her life. Marcus had asked her to meet him in his study at 10, not as his employee, but as the woman he declared his intention to build a life with. She stood before her small mirror, smoothing her simple blue dress and trying to calm her racing heart. Last night, wrapped in his arms before the fire, everything seemed possible. In daylight, the magnitude of what they were choosing felt overwhelming. Marcus Sterling didn't just come with wealth. He came with shareholders, board meetings, media scrutiny, and a social circle that would dissect their relationship like vultures picking over carrion. "You can do this," she whispered to her reflection, thinking of her daughter Amara's trusting smile. "You faced worse odds and survived." The walk to Marcus's study felt like a march to execution, but when she knocked and heard his familiar, "Come in," her fears quieted to a manageable whisper. He stood by the window overlooking the gardens, dressed not in his usual corporate armor, but in dark jeans and a gray sweater that made him look approachable, human. "I've been thinking," Marcus said without preamble, turning to face her with an expression that mixed determination with vulnerability. "I spent all night thinking about how to protect you from the worst of what's coming, how to shield you and Amara from the media circus, the society gossip, the inevitable attempts to paint you as a gold digger." Hope flickered in Zara's chest like a candle flame in wind. "And what did you decide?" "That I'm done hiding," Marcus replied, his voice gaining strength with each word. "That I'm going to take you to every gala, every board dinner, every public event, and let the world see exactly how proud I am to have you at my side. That I'm going to love you so publicly and so completely that no one will dare question whether this is real." Tears spilled down Zara's cheeks as the weight of his commitment settled over her. "The board will object. Your family." "Let them," Marcus said fiercely. "I've built this empire with my own hands, Zara. If they want to challenge me, they're welcome to try. But they won't win. Not when I'm fighting for something that actually matters." Public opinion is a hurricane, but love is the shelter that keeps you standing when everything else gets blown away. The photograph appeared on the front page of the Atlanta Business Journal's lifestyle section. Marcus Sterling and Zara Williams sharing an intimate moment at a downtown art gallery opening, her hand resting on his arm as he leaned down to whisper something that made her laugh. The caption read, "Sterling Industries CEO goes public with staff romance." Within hours, the story exploded across social media like wildfire. Twitter buzzed with hashtags ranging from supportive, #LoveWins, to cruel, #GoldDiggerAlert. The mansion's phone rang constantly with reporters seeking comments, society columnists fishing for scandal, and business associates expressing either congratulations or barely veiled disapproval. Zara sat in Marcus's study, scrolling through endless articles and opinion pieces while he fielded calls from his crisis management team. The comments sections were brutal battlegrounds where strangers debated her worthiness, her motivations, her right to exist in Marcus's world. "She's obviously a social climber who seduced her way into his bed," Zara read aloud from her phone, her voice hollow with hurt. "Poor Marcus Sterling doesn't realize he's being played by a professional victim." She looked up to find Marcus ending another call, his jaw tight with suppressed fury. "Stop reading those," he said firmly, crossing to pluck the phone from her hands. Anonymous cowards hiding behind keyboards don't deserve your attention." "But they're not all anonymous," Zara replied, gesturing to the newspaper clipping spread across his desk. "That's Margaret Ashworth, president of the Junior League. That's David Blackwood from the country club. These aren't strangers, Marcus. They're your peers." "Former peers," Marcus corrected, his voice ice cold. "Anyone who attacks you attacks me, and I have a very long memory." His hands found her shoulders, steadying her when she swayed under the weight of public scrutiny. "I warned you it would be brutal, sweetheart, but this is just the first wave. They'll get tired of the story when something more scandalous comes along." The study door burst open without warning, admitting Marcus's assistant Janet with wide, frightened eyes. "Mr. Sterling, I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's a crowd of reporters at the main gate. They're demanding a statement about your relationship status and—" She stopped mid-sentence, taking in Zara's tear-streaked face and Marcus's protective stance. "Should I call security?" "No," Marcus said after a moment of consideration. "Set up a press conference for this afternoon. If they want a statement, I'll give them one they'll never forget." His smile was sharp as a blade, all predator and no prey. "It's time to remind Atlanta exactly who they're dealing with." Zara's heart hammered as she realized what he was proposing. "Marcus, you don't have to." "Yes, I do, because loving you isn't something I'm ashamed of, Zara. It's the best decision I've ever made, and it's time the world knew it. The moment you stop apologizing for taking up space is the moment you discover you were born to illuminate entire rooms." The press conference was scheduled for 3 o'clock, but by noon, news vans lined Sterling Manor's circular drive like vultures circling carrion. Zara stood at the bedroom window, watching reporters set up cameras and lights, transforming the peaceful estate into a media circus. "You don't have to be there," Marcus said from behind her, his reflection joining hers in the glass. He wore his most intimidating business suit, charcoal gray with a blood-red tie that matched his mood. "I can handle this alone." "No," the word came out stronger than she expected, surprising them both. She turned to face him, squaring her shoulders with newfound resolve. "If we're doing this, we're doing it together. I'm tired of hiding, tired of feeling ashamed of something beautiful." Her voice gained strength with each word. "They want to see the gold digger maid who seduced the poor, helpless billionaire? Fine, let them look." Marcus's eyes blazed with pride and something deeper, a recognition that the woman before him was no longer the frightened maid who'd burst into his bathroom. "Are you sure? Once we step out there together, there's no taking it back?" "I don't want to take it back," Zara replied, smoothing her elegant navy dress, not a designer gown, but something respectable that she'd bought with her own money. At exactly 3 o'clock, they emerged from the mansion's front entrance hand in hand. Camera flashes exploded like fireworks as reporters shouted questions over each other, creating a cacophony of voices that would have terrified Zara weeks ago. Instead, she kept her chin high, her fingers intertwined with Marcus's hand, drawing strength from his steady presence beside her. Marcus approached the podium with the confidence of a man who'd addressed hostile boardrooms and congressional committees, but when he spoke, his voice carried a warmth that transformed corporate authority into something deeply personal. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his free hand never leaving Zara's waist, "I called this press conference to address the speculation surrounding my relationship with Zara Williams." He paused, his gaze finding hers in the crowd of strangers. "Zara is not my employee. She's my partner in every sense that matters. She's intelligent, compassionate, strong enough to face adversity with grace, and brave enough to love someone when the world tells her she shouldn't." A reporter shouted a question about the appropriateness of their relationship, but Marcus silenced him with a look that could freeze hellfire. The only inappropriate thing here is the assumption that love requires anyone's permission except the two people brave enough to choose each other. Then, to everyone's shock, Zara stepped forward to the microphone array. "I have something to say," she announced, her voice carrying clearly across the crowd. The reporters fell silent, sensing a story about to break wide open. "My name is Zara Williams. I'm a single mother, a college graduate, and yes, I worked as house staff to support my family. But I'm not ashamed of honest work, and I'm not ashamed of falling in love with a man who sees my worth beyond my paycheck." I swept aside, her eyes finding camera lenses instead of avoiding them. "If that makes me a gold digger in your eyes, then you've never understood what real gold looks like. It's not found in bank accounts. It's found in someone who chooses to love you exactly as you are." The silence that followed was deafening. Then, from somewhere in the crowd, slow applause began, building until it filled the afternoon air with unexpected support. Victory isn't measured in battles won, but in hearts brave enough to keep fighting when the war seems impossible. 3 months after the press conference that had divided Atlanta society, Zara Williams Sterling, the hyphenation had been her idea, a compromise that honored her independence and their unity, stood in the mansion's renovated staff quarters, which had been transformed into a comfortable apartment for families of household employees. Mrs. Sterling, Maria, the newest housekeeper, appeared in the doorway with nervous uncertainty. "I wanted to thank you again for the child care program. My daughter loves the after-school tutoring, and knowing she's safe here while I work," she trailed off, emotion making speech difficult. "None of that Mrs. Sterling formality," Zara replied with a warm smile, adjusting the fresh flowers in the common area. "We're all family here, and you're welcome. Every child deserves support and opportunity." It was one of many changes she'd implemented since becoming the mansion's lady of the house, transforming Marcus's sterile monument to wealth into something resembling a home.
The sound of running feet announced Amara's arrival, her 8-year-old daughter bursting through the door with Marcus close behind, both of them disheveled from their daily after-work soccer game in the garden. "Mom, Marcus taught me how to do a bicycle kick," Amara announced, launching herself into Zara's arms with muddy cleats and grass-stained knees. "Did he now?" Zara laughed, catching Marcus's eye over their daughter's head. The adoption papers had been finalized last month, making their unconventional family legally official. "I suppose you'll want to try out for the elite team next." "Can I, please?" Amara turned pleading eyes toward Marcus, who pretended to consider the question with exaggerated seriousness. "Well," he said slowly, "if your grades stay up and you keep helping your mom with her literacy program at the community center," he grinned as Amara squealed and threw her arms around his waist, "then yes, we'll talk about elite soccer." Later that evening, after Amara had been tucked into bed with a story and promises of weekend adventures, Zara and Marcus sat on their private balcony overlooking the garden where they'd first admitted their feelings under starlight. The city sparkled beyond the estate walls, but their world had contracted to just this: shared silence, intertwined fingers, the comfortable weight of choosing each other daily. "Any regrets?" Marcus asked, his thumb tracing circles on her wedding ring, a simple platinum band that had sparked more society gossip than her entire jewelry collection. "Only that we wasted so much time being afraid," Zara replied, leaning against his shoulder as night settled around them. "Do you ever miss it, the simplicity of your old life?" Marcus's laugh rumbled through his chest, vibrating against her cheek. "You mean the empty mansion, the meaningless relationships, the hollow victories?" He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "The only thing I miss is the ignorance, not knowing how much better life could be with the right person to share it."
A shooting star streaked across the sky above them, and Zara smiled, remembering the frightened maid who burst into a billionaire's bathroom chasing escape from a rat. She'd found something infinitely more valuable, a love that had survived society's judgment, media scrutiny, and her own deepest fears. "Make a wish," Marcus whispered, following her gaze to the heavens. "I don't need to," Zara replied, settling deeper into his embrace. "I already have everything I could ever want." The most radical act is choosing happiness when the world insists you settle for survival. 1 year later, Sterling Manor buzzed with preparation for its annual charity gala, but this time the cause was close to home. The Dreams and Dignity Foundation, established by Marcus and Zara, provided educational scholarships and job training for single parents and displaced workers. What had begun as a defensive response to criticism had evolved into genuine social impact. Zara stood in the mansion's grand ballroom, no longer the invisible maid, but the confident co-founder checking final details with the event coordinator. Her emerald gown was elegant without being ostentatious, her natural hair styled in an updo that showcased the diamond earrings Marcus had given her, not for their anniversary, but for completing her master's degree in social work while managing their foundation. "The annexing open is already exceeding projections," Janet reported, her former nervousness around Zara long since replaced by warm respect. "And the mayor wants to present you both with the city's humanitarian award during dinner." Make sure the cameras catch Marcus's surprise. He hates being caught off guard, but he loves being proud of our work. Across the room, Marcus stood with a group of business leaders who'd once questioned his judgment, but now sought partnerships with his foundation. His laughter carried easily through the crowd, genuine joy that had replaced the calculating charm of his bachelor days. When his eyes found Zara's across the ballroom, his entire face transformed with the kind of love that made society photographers' cameras click frantically. "Excuse me," he told his companions, already moving toward his wife with single-minded determination. The crowd parted for him automatically, but there was nothing intimidating about his approach now, just a man eager to reach the woman who'd made his world make sense. "Mrs. Sterling," he said formally when he reached her, offering his arm with exaggerated gallantry. "Would you honor me with a dance?" "I suppose I could spare a few minutes for the co-chairman," she replied, matching his playful tone while accepting his escort to the dance floor. As they moved into a waltz, the ballroom seemed to fade around them, leaving just two souls who'd found their rhythm together. "Do you remember," Marcus murmured against her ear as they swayed, "when you told me this was insane, that we were from different worlds?" "Vaguely," Zara teased, then grew serious. "I was wrong about the different worlds part. We weren't from different worlds. We were both trapped in worlds that didn't fit us. We just needed to build a new one together." From the edge of the dance floor, Amara watched her parents with the satisfied expression of a child whose greatest wish had come true. A real family, complete with bedtime stories from Marcus, soccer games on weekends, and a mother who laughed more than she worried. She'd grown 3 inches in the past year, and her confidence had grown even more. As the evening progressed and the gala raised record funds for their foundation, Zara reflected on the journey that had brought them here. The frightened maid and the lonely billionaire had become partners in every sense. In love, in parenting, in purpose. They'd weathered society's judgment and emerged stronger, their relationship a testament to the radical power of choosing authenticity over convention. Later, after the last guest had departed and Amara had fallen asleep exhausted from dancing with every adult who'd asked, Marcus and Zara found themselves back in the garden where it all began. The fountain still trickled peacefully under starlight, but everything else had changed. So, Marcus said, pulling her close under the same sky where they'd first admitted their feelings. What's next for the Sterling family? Zara smiled, thinking of the pregnancy test hidden in her jewelry box, a secret she'd planned to share tonight until the gala's demands took precedence. Tomorrow, she decided. Tomorrow they'd start planning the newest addition to their unconventional family. Whatever comes next, she replied, echoing the promise they'd made to each other that stormy night by the fireplace. We face it together. And in the distance, Atlanta's skyline glittered with possibility, witness to a love story that had defied every expectation and rewritten every rule, proving that sometimes the most beautiful chapters begin when you stop asking permission to live your own story. The mansion that had once echoed with silence now rang with laughter, love, and the sound of a family that had built itself on courage rather than convention. And if the society pages still whispered occasionally about the maid who'd married the billionaire, those whispers were increasingly drowned out by the stories of the lives they changed, the dreams they funded, and the proof that love, when brave enough to show itself, could indeed conquer all. In Sterling Manor, where a frightened woman had once run from a rat straight into the arms of destiny, every room now held the echo of a truth that had transformed them both. The most radical act of all is choosing love when the world insists you settle for anything less.
Thank you for watching. Please tell us where you are watching from, and don't forget to subscribe for the next love story.